Well, Habré's trial is being touted as a test case for Africa's legal institutions. But does this case, or the answer to this case, provide a viable answer now to the ICC? For more, we have in studio with us Ottilia Maunganidze from the Institute of Security Studies. Thank you so much for your time, Ottilia.
Glad to be here.
Speak to us of the significance of the case at this point and the concept that comes into play here, the one of universal jurisdiction.
Well, the significance of this trial is one that it doesn't necessarily mean that justice can be done immediately, but more importantly, that where victims are concerned, at least on their part, that they will continue to call for justice. And what we are seeing now is a culmination of over 20 years of efforts to ensure that Hissène Habré at least faces trial. Now, when it comes to the issue of universal jurisdiction, he is being prosecuted in Senegal, not in Chad, where the crimes were committed. Yes. He's being prosecuted in Senegal because he decided to move to Senegal in exile after he was overthrown in Chad. And what Senegal is doing is they're basically prosecuting him on the basis of the fact that these crimes are crimes under their jurisdiction and they are able to prosecute him. And they're doing so with the support of the African Union.
All right, Ottilia, this is the first time, it's one of many firsts, this case. It's the first time the courts of one country are trying the leader of another country for human rights abuses. It's also the first time the AU has set up a tribunal of this nature. And it's also the very first time that victims themselves of a dictator in Africa have brought that very dictator to justice. But let's take a step back for a moment. Just talk to us about the reign of Habré. Tell us how he came to power. More importantly, who supported him and what he did.
Well, Hissène Habré came to power during a time where, as you know, many of the viewers would know, during a time of the Cold War, when there was quite a lot in terms of proxy wars as well as support being lent to certain governments by different governments, particularly the United States, Russia, as well as China on the other hand. And Hissène Habré's ascent to power was really through the support of the then U.S. administration. And he governed the country for a period of time with some support from them. However, he was overthrown by Chadians themselves, having recognized that his government was in many ways violating the human rights of Chadians during that time.
All right, Ottilia, if this case is conducted well enough and in the end we are fortunate enough to reach a credible verdict, to what extent will it strengthen or solidify certain African nations' argument that Africans themselves should bring to justice their own?
Well, I'll start right at the end in terms of the need for African countries to be able to bring justice themselves. And that's something that's important, that's something that's envisaged in the international criminal justice system. So it is encouraged that African countries take on board this challenge and do the work themselves. The thing about the extraordinary chambers in Senegal is that this chamber was created specifically for one person. Whether that's a model that other African countries should follow, that's something that needs to be debated. Courts should be established in order to prosecute anyone and everyone who commits crimes. But obviously, Hissène Habré's case was a unique one. And in other African countries, what they can do is to at least have frameworks in place that allow them to prosecute people as and when those crimes happen and not to wait 25 years.
Ottilia, what I find interesting in this case is that victims themselves are the architects of the case or the prosecution. And it really brings us to the human face behind the story, doesn't it? And it's going to make it all the more difficult, you would say, for Habré to pose as some sort of victim being hounded by an international court or an international prosecutor, because it simply isn't the case here.
I fully agree. And in many ways, what this case has done is put international criminal justice in the field where it should be. Focus has often overwhelmingly been on who the perpetrators are. So they focus on the fact that such and such a person has a high profile and that's the perpetrator. And they ignore the many hundreds of thousands of victims. And this case did exactly the opposite. It was a case that was initially brought by victims that were now living in Belgium, who now sought justice for the crimes that Hissène Habré is alleged to have committed. So finally, victims are being seen as the people for whom justice must be done.
All right, Ottilia, let's talk about the US and France, who backed the Habré regime. In fact, it was the Ronald Reagan administration who first helped put him in power and then maintained him there and then helped him to the very last day when he fled to Senegal. And of course, we saw the US and France indeed being very vociferous, very vocal when it came to the ICC and Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir coming before those, facing those charges. The same with the Kenyan leaders. Yet they're largely silent over the Habré case. Is this not yet another case of the West's double standards?
Well, to say that they're silent on the Habré case now might be a bit remiss, particularly France as well as Belgium that also lent some support during Habré's rule. Because this has been a matter that has been going on now for over 2 decades. In the years initially in early 2000, when there were efforts to prosecute Hissène Habré outside of Senegal, France, for example, came out to say that he should be prosecuted. And so that is something, obviously now, it would be great, at the very least, if they did say something about his government. But as you rightly point out, they did help support him in ensuring that he was in power. Their argument might be that they supported him being in office, but not the crimes that he's alleged to have committed. But, you know, we're yet to hear that coming out of the US as well as coming out of France. But at the very least, they should lend their support towards processes to ensure justice on the African continent.
Thank you, Ottilia, for your time on the PM News Desk. It has been a pleasure chatting to you. That was Ottilia Maunganidze from the Institute of Security Studies.